You're listening to Breaking New Ground. In this podcast, we provide thought-provoking conversations for those looking to begin or advance their entrepreneurial real estate goals.
Together, we'll venture into the world of commercial real estate with entrepreneurs who challenge the status quo, building innovative paths with bold approaches.
We're your hosts. I'm John Pugh, a real estate developer and investor.
And I'm Rachel Walters, a real estate marketing expert. Throughout our episodes, we'll bring in real estate trailblazers, creating a space for inspiring conversations surrounding commercial real estate.
Pugh Management is proud to sponsor the podcast Breaking New Ground. Pugh Management is a premier developer for mixed-use, multifamily, and industrial properties. We love to develop places to live, work, and play. Pugh Management partners with family offices and institutional investors on projects in New England and Central Florida. Check us out online at pughmgmt.com.
In today's episode, Aleksey Chernobelskiy is joining us to share his entrepreneurial journey in commercial real estate.
Aleksey is a consultant and seasoned advisor to limited partners investing in real estate.
Aleksey, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, for sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to connect with you and share your story with our audience. I think you and I connected on social media. I know you're very active there. And I've read a little bit about your story. Just for the audience, maybe could you tell us I believe you've come to the entrepreneurial space somewhat recently. Can you maybe tell us your origin story a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, I guess I always thought I'd be sort of like a W-2 employee. I didn't really think of other options in a sense. Just didn't grow up that way. I came to the U.S. when I was 11. And yeah, I had different successes in the investment world. Most recently, I led 2 teams at a public real estate investment trust. Left, wanted to bet on myself. Had some downs, had some ups. Ultimately, some of that led me to discovering the big world of syndications, and realizing that I think it's underserved as far as LPs are concerned. There's a ton of capital that goes into the space in terms of investments. A lot of that capital is pretty significant in terms of like the net worth to the LP as a percentage. And despite that being true, a lot of people are kind of YOLOing their money in a sense. And so I figured, some more education might be helpful, and I started. I'm still, it's still fairly new. Like I think I'm 9 months in, so still learning as I go.
So as a young person, where did you immigrate from? I'm curious where you came from.
Russia, Moscow.
Was that a pretty significant transition? You think that really impacted the way you see the world? I'm sure it must have, right?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, you come to another country and like you can't speak to anyone, so it was like a pretty difficult year or so, but then you realize, like you persevere and you work through stuff, and then you learn the language and you'll be all right,
Nice. Yeah, I just asked because, there's so many great immigrant stories in terms of entrepreneurial success, and it's definitely something I'm sure that resonates with the audience. So we connected on X, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago. I started kind of connecting with you and following your content and kind of getting to know you better. How long have you mentioned the real estate investment trust that you were in charge of managing? How long ago did you make that transition?
I left, I think it was Q1 of 22. So getting pretty close to 2.5 years, which sounds weird. I mean, like it feels like it was just yesterday. And it's funny, like, I don't know if you can relate to this as an entrepreneur, but like sometimes you have days when you're like, man, like maybe I should get a real job.
Oh yeah.
You just have like really good days, and then you have some bad days. And I think the way I like to say it is the good days hit better than bonus day at a W-2, and the bad days are much worse than your worst day at a W-2.
Oh yeah. Interesting. So one of the things that I think is interesting. So you're in terms of your business right now. I know you're doing consulting it's mostly just for limited partners. Is that right?
95%. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah. And
I
so are
advise,
you?
and that's existing positions,
Mhm.
right? And also positions that people are thinking about. If someone is thinking about investing as an LP, they'll also reach out.
So is it just you? Do you have kind of a team that you work with, or how is your
Just
business
me.
set up?
Just
Nice.
me.
Alexey, sorry, I'm not as familiar with your work as a consultant. So are you matching these LPs with projects, or how are you working with the LPs as a consultant?
Yeah, good question. I'm not matching. I'm pretty sure that requires licensing, like brokerage and all that type of stuff. What I do is I just speak to the LP. It's an engagement between me and the LP. They send me a deck, and I just send my thoughts, like it as if I was looking at it, and a friend asks me like, "Hey, what do you think?" I kind of
Oh, okay.
send them that feedback, and they can do whatever they want with it, right? I never tell them invest or don't invest. My goal is to just make sure that they understand what they're investing in, right? Whenever you're investing in something, um, a portion of your investment process is understanding the risk. So I sort of like try my best to help with that. Um, and of course, different people will have different responses. Like some people will get the report and be like, wait, you're saying that there's a probability that I might not make 15%? Like, what do you mean? I thought
Hmm.
that's like the base case, right? And
Yeah.
some people will not understand the fact that the downside is losing everything. Obviously, the
Hmm.
probability of that is not 100%, otherwise, you wouldn't be looking at it, right? But the probability is there and it's just dependent on some variables, right? So, like, I really try to educate in the process, and people will respond to it, right? Some people will freak out and be like, I had no idea what I was getting into. Thank you so much. And some people will be like, yeah, I was kind of expecting this. Like, these are some good questions. Let me send them. They'll get some
Hmm.
responses back, and they were satisfied, and they'll invest.
So I have two questions. One, what's the makeup of your typical LP? Are they people who have a real estate background? Are they people who have invested in real estate at all? Are they new? And then my second question is, how are you finding these LPs?
So makeup really varies. I've had, I think the way that I started the business and still is the goal is to reach retail LPs. So people, let's say people that are investing 50 grand to 500 grand, right? Like that range. Um, in terms of how but over time also what I've realized, I'm putting like I have an entire database of what's going on since people reach out to me on existing deals. A lot of those are falling apart. Some of them have capital calls. Some GPs like are not communicating or perhaps like um, acting in let's call it like suspicious ways, right? So like I have an entire database of all of this information. And so the ultimate goal of the business long term is to figure out um, how can I make the space more transparent. That's really the goal. Um,
Hmm.
Said simply, like let's say John is invested in a GP, and you and John don't know each other, Rachel. Um, and John invested 100 grand, and like it's been 2 years, he hasn't gotten a check. He has sent them several emails, called, and they were so nice, when he invested, and they were so pleasant. And all of a sudden, like they're just not responding to anything. And then all of
Hmm.
a sudden, the same GP meets you, Rachel, at some conference, and they're so nice and like so pleasant. Um, and they send you the deck, and the deck has all of their deals that they're invested in, and it's like 500 million AUM. And one of those deals that they're invested in is John's deal, right? But you don't know John, right? And so when you're looking at this investment, you're totally clueless um, as to what's happening with the existing portfolio and those LP experiences. And so, I mean, this is like I don't know how many years this will take, right? But like, but the goal ultimately is this: how do I put John and Rachel together, right? In a fair way too, right? This is the hardest part, which is like if John complains about his dividend being like 7% instead of 8% that month, it's like, come on, like I don't think that's useful information, right? But there are other pieces of information such as not hearing back and like no dividends for 2 years, like that would definitely somehow impact your investment decision, Rachel. And so the question is like, how can I bring those two together, and close the gap? Because otherwise, like the industry is extremely opaque, and even though it's opaque, it attracts billions of dollars of capital. Um, so yeah, and to answer your second question, how do I find them? Um, I mean, to be candid, it's pretty hard to find them, right? There's no like direct path to LPs. So what I try to do, I mean, there's some referrals that come in all the time, which I'm really grateful for. But other than that, it's just sharing on social media. I write at lplessons.co to 4,000 LPs, and I've been doing that for like 9 months, and it's grown, and hopefully it continues to grow.
Yeah, I think what you're doing, I mean, and I've seen this kind of said before, but I totally agree with the sentiment. Is you're providing, like, as you said, it's a very opaque market. The public markets, there's so much efficiency there. People that are bad actors get flushed out, and private markets, because there's the opacity that you described, there unfortunately can allow some bad actors and not even just bad actors, also just people that aren't necessarily as professional as they should be in terms of their investor relations communications, right? To exist and to continue raising capital. We were talking with a friend earlier, and he typically doesn't raise money. He doesn't do equity syndications with people he doesn't know, because of the potential risk that there's a misalignment of interests, or heck, the person just doesn't know him, and they don't, the level of trust, right? In terms of the relationship between the GP and the LP, there's always the need for such a huge level of trust. Because I mean, you described it briefly earlier when you were kind of talking about your business initially. Just some people are putting a significant amount of their net worth into these investments, and it's kind of scary scary for me, for them, because of the risks that they're taking on. They're not even aware of it. And I mean, I assume a big part of what you do is read operating agreements and kind of flush through kind of those, what those terms are. Is that a big part of what you do?
So I typically spend like 90% of my time looking at decks. I'll look at legal agreements to the extent that there are business terms to look at, or business implications,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you're right, and I think one thing I've noticed is, look, at the end of the day, the fundraising business is sales, and
Yeah.
there's just a lot of, look, you can call them whatever you want, bad actors. I don't know, like they're just salespeople. You can call it bad, good. I don't know what you want to call it, but I just spoke to someone yesterday, and I recorded a new podcast, and in the middle of the sales process, the person was told, like, why is your money in the retirement account? Like, you should get out of the stocks, because like, look at the past 10 years, they've been going up steadily, and the stock market is going to drop. So take all of your money out and invest it with me. Because like real estate is super safe, and it's going to be great for you. And this is just very common, right? Like these types of narratives, and unfortunately, like LPs just don't know better in many cases, right? Like as we talked about earlier, they don't come from investing backgrounds, they don't come from real estate backgrounds typically, and so they're just like, oh yeah, like I guess that's true. Like my house is pretty stable, and like if you invest in it over a long term, of course the difference is your house has a 30-year mortgage. It doesn't have a maturity in 5 years, right? And there's a bunch of other things, right? It's a much more liquid investment, whatever. So my point being, there's just a lot of sales that goes on in this space, and I think many LPs kind of are just blind to the sales aspect.
We talk a lot in commercial real estate technology about data silos, and whether that's in due diligence, in sales data, in even just individual building data. So it really feels like you are collecting a lot of data that is not seen by most people, or I have to ask John, or I have to have a network to understand how these projects are getting done or how these syndications are. So can you maybe talk to if you have any plans of collecting all this information and if you have any future plans with it? Because it seems like you're sitting on maybe a little gold mine of data.
I think there's sort of like a few data products that I've thought of. Um, I mean, this sounds so silly, Rachel, but I'm just like so new to business. I'm also very new to like charging people, and it like feels weird. So there's a lot of these things that I'm just like, um, there's just a lot of big decisions to make, and they feel very tough, and I tend to make them slower than I probably should. Um, I've definitely thought about bringing like the data out to the public. The question is, first of all, like I just don't think I'm at. Like, I mean, I look at it right now. So like my um, GP table has 351 entries, right? So 351 entries. So this is basically some LP who called me and said, "Hey, I'm invested in X, um, and here's my experience." Or someone who is potentially investing in them, and there's some information, right? So 351 sounds like a lot. It's 351 more than that's available publicly. But I also have to recognize that I think this is like quite literally nothing. Like I think this table is not useful at all um, to a large population unless it's got, I don't know, 5,000 entries or something like that, right? But I think that data like compounds on itself over time because if you can find something that happened 5 years ago, right, and the sponsor's trying to cover it up, I mean, maybe it didn't make it on the news. Most things don't make it to the news, right?
Okay.
But that's kind of like that's what I'm trying to work towards, ideally.
Yeah, I didn't mean to throw you a hardball that you have to have the answer now. I guess I just wanted to point out that this data that you are starting to collect is going to be meaningful. And like you said, maybe it'll be a couple more years, but it is more than most people have access to or can see as an individual or even within their small network. So I think something to think about. Also, I really want to thank you for your transparency because we're talking to a lot of entrepreneurs and people who are in stages maybe similar to yours of I have this idea, I have this passion, I'm going to keep working on it and we'll see where this iterates, right? So maybe you do use that data years from now in a different way, but thank you so much for being transparent as to where you are now. But I did want to point out, I think this data that you're collecting is going to be very meaningful for the industry or for your, I'm sure for your LPs.
I mean,
already.
one obvious idea is a GP scoring system, right? That you're rating GPs based on their previous relationships with their LPs. That's an obvious one, but I think it's kind of an interesting one as a concept too.
Yeah, I mean, so that's something that was sort of a going in idea with the business. I mean, I think what you're describing is essentially like a Moody's or an S&P for private placements. I think that the deeper I got into the space, the more complicated that gets. I think also, which the good thing is that I will have an unfair advantage in doing it with a database that no one else has. But I think what I want to point out is that the reason why it's so difficult is there's really two components to any deal. One is the GP itself and like the health of the GP entity. In other words, if you're asking me to issue a rating on sort of like a GP's deal, it depends on the deal itself, but it also depends on the GP. And if you want that rating to live on over time,
Mm-hmm.
just like when someone asks S&P to give you a credit rating, they need your
Yep.
financials. So to here.
Exactly.
And so
Yeah.
this is kind of interesting because um, I think the only way I can get there is sort of like um, GPs start reaching out, and I've gotten a lot of that. Like a lot of GPs have reached out for me to help them capital raise, which I don't
Yep.
do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but perhaps at some point it becomes, well, I can't help you capital raise, but you can be part of this table. But here's the stuff that I need from you in order to do that. And many people might say no thanks, but some people might say sure. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really great. Or maybe there's something where um, you don't rate people, but the GPs that are coming to you and you have found to be pretty solid, that maybe you can work with them on their marketing. So not that you're saying people should invest in them, but you're at
Yeah.
least know their solid background and are willing to promote them instead of, pointing out the bad, maybe just starting to share some more of the good. That's my marketing brain thinking. And
Yeah.
along those lines, I would love to hear more about your social media work. And since that's how John met you, and I'm assuming this is where you're sharing your information and what you've learned through all of this. So if you can talk more about how you started on social media, some of your wins on social media would be really great, I think, for our audience.
Yeah. So I started probably 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 at this point. Basically, shortly after I left my W-2. I think the hardest thing about social media is it's very difficult. It's very difficult to develop a following while being employed
Yeah.
by someone else. I think a lot of people say that it's fine and it doesn't matter, but I really think it matters. It's just looked down
Mm-hmm.
upon and like whatever. I mean, it's a longer conversation if you want to have it, but I think it's a very risky venture in the vast majority of cases. Um, anyway, so I started 2.5 years ago. In terms of my lessons or findings, um, in the beginning, I didn't really have a goal. I think that there was two things that changed my mind about social. And by the way, to be clear for the audience, like I don't have like a crazy following. It's decent, but I don't consider myself sort of like some social media guru. So I mean, this is just a few things that I've learned. Um, the first thing that opened my eyes to social is at some point, I think it was like Time Magazine or something. It was like the top 100 people of the year, and number one or number two or something was Mr. Beast. And I talked to my like I turned to my wife and I was like, what the heck is this? Like it's like some kid like making stupid videos about like blowing stuff up or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Um, and she just turns to me and she's like, well, I mean, it's probably true. Like when Mr. Beast says something, more people listen to that message than when Obama speaks or the president speaks or
Mm-hmm.
whoever. Who was, I think Obama was maybe four or for number five. I can't remember exactly, but meaning the point is like it totally warps reality of like, oh, that's kind of crazy. Like this is a list of influential people, and it's kind of true. Like more ears will listen, and Mr. Beast can influence people in a way that the current president of the United States can't, which is wild. I mean, it's just like a wild thought that
Mm-hmm.
I like realized. I mean, I was just like, okay, like clearly I had no idea what this is about. um, that was the first thing, and then a second thing I've heard this quote a few times is, in any business, it's not a function of who you know; it's really who knows you. And I think
Yeah.
social media is really the only thing that allows you to develop relationships at scale. I'll get, I mean, at least one DM per week that goes something like, "Hey, I've been following you for 6 months or a year. I haven't really commented, but I've like really enjoyed your stuff, and like I have a deal. Would you mind reviewing it?" And I'm always like, so it's to this day, like 2 years in, it's so weird because you've never
Mm-hmm.
spoken to this person, but they've been paying attention to the stuff that you write. In some cases, for a year or 2 years, and then eventually they reach out. And so that's sort of like what allows you to develop relationships at scale, which is super powerful. Yeah. So I mean, I think those are the biggest things that I've gotten out of it.
I think your point
Yeah,
about
I think those are great points.
yeah, I think your point about the I think a lot of people it sounds like you were as well. I personally was reluctant to market myself because as a child I was taught to be humble and to be to not go out and basically sing your own praises.
Yeah.
But at some point as an entrepreneur, you like you said, there's you come to realization that a big part of business is just people knowing that you're in business and what you do.
Yep. Exactly.
And social media is so great for that now.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to see kind of how things have evolved, especially in the real estate space. I feel like for so many years, real estate, and I think this has transformed somewhat recently. Real estate kind of looked down its nose. Institutional real estate certainly looked down its nose at social media. Anybody was on social media because it was like, oh, they're just the syndicate. A lot of equity syndicators. Grant Cardone, people like that are on social media. Selling things. And I personally didn't even know what retweet was until probably November of last year, and when I joined, I actually really started posting on X and engaging, and it's really interesting to see just the people that are on there now. That there are some influential people and people that are really making a meaningful impact in our business.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a question there, but it's an observation. I think. But it's only going to continue to get more. The thing that I love about it is that you're speaking directly to your audience, right? Like you look at like the TV, you look at even like internet, like a web page. You're just putting something out and hoping somebody shows up, right? But when you're speaking on social media, you're
directly to them,
speaking to your tribe, right?
Yep.
So what are some of the things that you've done
I think
specifically
one thing,
to build that? Yeah.
Build the audience, you said?
Yeah. I'm just curious because I know you kind of were humble about the size of your audience, but you have a good audience you've built. And just curious how you.
So I guess two quick things. First of all, you mentioned you speaking directly to the audience. One lesson I learned that I think I very much underappreciated, at least for the first year of growing my audience. Partially because I just didn't know why I was growing it. I mean, I just knew that it would be important, but I didn't have this business, and I was just like, let me just share stuff and like see where it goes. I think the biggest challenge of social media is that I kind of what you said is true, but it's out of your control. In other words, you're speaking to the audience, but you're subject to an algorithm that's completely outside of your control and it can be changed at any time. And I heard like a few horror stories about like people getting deplatformed on Twitter or YouTube or whatever. And I mean, you spent like years building up this amazing audience, and you've got millions of subscribers or whatever, and all of a sudden, the lights go out, and you like you're just like, whoa, like this was everything that I did. And I'm not talking about the politics of this or like whether they did the right thing or not, but putting that aside, um, at the end of the day, like your business just grinded to a halt, right? And so that made me realize that I need like what I would call actual direct access. So that's what made me start a newsletter, which initially I was like very hesitant to start. It's more work. I thought like I mean I still think one of my only B's in college was English, so I was like, who am I to write anything of value? Like whatever. That's a whole other topic. But so that's the first thing I would say is like to anyone who's building an audience, I would strongly encourage um, to try to at least get your um, best followers to something. And by the way, that doesn't need to be a newsletter. Like you could create an Airtable, for example, and they can just quickly fill out a form if they want to hear from you on stuff. But somehow you need to transfer that to like sort of you controlling when you speak to your audience as opposed to Twitter doing it or YouTube or whatever. In terms of how I grew the following, I mean, honestly, I don't really have great advice. it's just consistency. Like I posted every single day, some cases 2 to 3 times a day. Um,
Mm.
in the beginning, I quite literally felt like I was just talking to myself. There's just no one listening. I think I underappreciated like replies and engaging with other people.
Mhm.
You sort of have this idea that if you come up with like a great idea, everyone's going to comment on it, and then you post it, and it's like total crickets, and you don't even get one like.
Yeah.
And so, in that sense, I would tell people to sort of save the great ideas for when you have a larger audience, so you have like a larger percentage or larger
Mm.
chance of that um, tweet getting some steam. You can always repost as well. Um, and then, this sounds weird, but it's like the weirdest stuff goes viral. Like you always think you have like the best tweet, and you're like tweet it, and it's like 2 likes. Um, and then you tweet something in the middle of like a conversation on the phone, and it gets a few million views, and you're like, you know. So I think that just goes to say that the consistency part is really important, which is pretty
Yeah.
exhausting. I'll be honest. Like even right now, like I'm sitting here, like I think I haven't really posted in like a week or so. It's a lot. Like I mean, you consistently have to think about like what am I writing? It has to be done well, written well. It's just a lot, and you don't really get paid for it too. So but at the end of the day, it's your marketing engine.
Yeah. I particularly, when I first kind of came across your content, whoever I see on that's posting regularly on social media that I think is like, it's clear that you know what you're talking about, right? As soon as you read your content, because you only know some of the things that you post. If you've been in that position, if you've walked in those shoes. And I think there's a lot of people on social media that are just saying random things, or they're trying to act like they've done it. And it's pretty clear pretty quickly that, that you're an expert in this particular, in what you do, which is great. So
I just
just
want to jump in. Sorry, I just want to jump in real quick. And I think this has become more apparent in the last couple of years is authenticity. I think everyone is pretty sick of flashy marketing speak. You can really see quickly who that is and what they're selling.
yeah.
And I think that's why retweet is really popular, because it's people being very real, and it's
Mm-hmm.
it's not flashy. Sometimes it's not
Mm.
beautiful. Maybe sometimes it's self-deprecating. It's showing how hard things are. Not always talking about how amazing the market is and how much money you're going to make, but some really hard things that people are going through. And I think that has really, helped increase that trust, and why people in real estate are maybe turning to Twitter a little bit more. And so I think your tweets, show that, right? Like you're not selling, you're giving your insight and your feedback.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's I think the hard part about developing an audience. If you want to develop it well, I mean, some people who have done it extremely well is like strip mall guy, for example, car dealership guy. I mean, they just basically came on and they were anonymous, and they were just like, I'm going to tweet 3 times a day and provide value and see where it goes. And obviously, I mean, they have hundreds of thousands of followers at this point. Um, and
Mm.
that's the best way to grow an audience. At the end of the day, like the crazy thing about Twitter is like if you post valuable stuff, it gets seen and then it gets shared and then people follow you, and you just got to do it again and again and again and again, and over time that over all of that stuff compounds. I would also add to your point, like authenticity is like I think underappreciated. Um, I kind of joked, I think on LinkedIn or Twitter, I can't remember. LinkedIn is a little scary to joke at. But
It's more marketing than the next, right? It's
yeah,
it's
it's
interesting.
different.
It's
Yeah.
evolved. At one point, it was a much more kind of authentic thing. I don't think it's as authentic as it used to. Do you agree?
I think on LinkedIn people are just have their it's not anonymous, right? I think half of Twitter's
Yeah.
users are anonymous, give or take, and so like that allows
Uh,
people to
Good point.
I mean that brings good parts and bad parts, right? That brings some like pretty negative posts because you don't know who they are. And you would never receive those posts on LinkedIn. People just wouldn't say anything. But it also brings some positivity as well, I think, to the community, which is, the good part and the bad part of Twitter. But just on authenticity really fast, like I think a huge part of the following and developing one is just being authentic. All right, as you said, throwing in some jokes. Like sometimes I'll make some memes, putting in some videos, like sharing some, like what's happening in your life. I don't know, like some point I went rock climbing. I'll put up a video. Like people don't just want to see, like the intense tweets, so to speak, on like information heavy tweets. They want to see that, probably my guess is 60-70% of the time. But a lot of people go to social to like laugh. Like everyone has a busy day, like so you know the last thing you want when you're in the middle of like a fire at work is to go to your phone to take a break, and there's like a long thread about something that you actually care about, but you just can't have the brain space to think about it, right? And
That's a good point.
to be candid, I think a lot of like companies just don't understand this. Like if you look at I mean, I don't think you have to edit this out. I'm comfortable saying it. I mean, if you look at most marketing, forget marketing, like social media, marketing positions within companies, there are people that have like never developed a following, and like they're posting these like cringy things every single day on Instagram, and they get like 2 views, and they just don't understand how social works, right? And the companies are paying them, and I can tell you right now they have like zero returns. But at some point, I think hopefully, people will understand that like social is about social. It's not one way. Like, once you develop a massive gathering of people, you can just post and not respond, right? But until that happens, posting some like, fake thing about, how amazing you are as a company is not going to get you views.
Yeah, your point. I think your point's a really good one. Like you have marketing people, many of whom are maybe younger, managing their social media feed, and they're just putting out, "Hey, we did this great thing," and like, as nice as it is to promote doing great things, you got to have some type of information or content that people actually want to engage with or find funny or interesting or meaningful in some way. And I think that's definitely a piece that companies, not really people have within companies have trouble kind of figuring that out. But that also comes back to the decision and leadership of the companies that may or may not understand social themselves, right? So
I see a lot
that's
of times,
actually true.
Yeah, I see a lot of times in commercial real estate, brokers saying, "Oh, we have to have an Instagram account for this project," but that's it. So they check a box. We have the Instagram. There's no ROI. There's no engagement. And so I think that's what's missing and why entrepreneurs get it right, because they're looking at the ROI, their time is valuable. But sometimes bigger companies are just using social media as a checkbox and not really looking for that ROI. And I do find the entrepreneurs in commercial real estate doing much more interesting things.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think we want to kind of wrap up. So I think one of the things we want to, make sure we understand is kind of what do you, in 2024, there's some goals or a specific kind of, what's your focus? Is it growing your audience? Is it connecting with more people? What are you focused
on? A lot of it is just trying to figure out how to grow the business, right? I was just driving home today, and I was like, I think I was listening to a podcast, and it was like, I think it said something like, if you're not reinvesting in your business, you're not growing. And then I just realized, like, for the past 9 months, like, any money that the business has made, I've basically sent to my checking account, and part of it I used for like living expenses for the family, and part of it I put into whatever treasuries or whatever. And I realized, like, I've never ran an ad, I've never like really thought about growth. It's just like this expectation that I'm just going to keep posting on social media and like it's going to grow. And that's working, right? I mean, I think I've been somewhat successful at it. But, I'm really trying to think about like how do I double stuff or 5x in a somewhat short period of time. And that has really kind of breaks your mind a little bit. Even though I think a lot of it is possible, some of it requires capital, right? Investments, but that's what I'm thinking about a lot about. Like I've gotten to a healthy, steady state of like being able to provide for the family, thankfully. But the question is like, now what? Like I don't have a strong interest in just sort of being like like renting out my time, so to speak, over long term.
Sure.
And so the question is, how long do I need to build an audience? At what point is the right time to build different products around this? And also, like, how do I take myself out of this eventually? And can I? Like, is this, in other words, am I building a real business, or it's just a job in a sense that feels like a business but really isn't, right? Would someone buy this one day or not? Right, that's an interesting question to ponder as well.
So what are some of the things that you kind of think about strategically that might allow you to figure some of those things out? What are you engaging with conversations with some people that maybe have some experience in that? I'm curious kind of how you plan on kind of expanding.
I don't really know who to talk to be honest. It's an interesting thing. I don't know if you guys have felt the same thing. I think
Absolutely.
Most people that I look up to a lot have been successful in the W-2 world. And I think that world is great, but it's just the makeup of it is so different, right? So it's difficult for me to go to, an MD or an exec at Goldman and say, hey, like, what do you think about me advertising on Twitter? And they're going to be like, what the heck, like, are you talking about? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Why don't you just get a real job and like you'll be fine? Stop asking me stupid questions. And by the way, it could be that one day I'll realize that they were right. I don't know, but I think it's tough to get advice because I just don't know. First of all, to my knowledge, I don't even know of any competitors in my space, right? So it's not like I can sort of look up to someone that has done this, and a lot of it is like I think very very much untreaded waters. So what I'm trying to do is sort of learn about other people's business models that have nothing to do with the LP GP universe, but they're similar. They're like solopreneurs, for example, or they've built a business that has recurring revenue, or they've like productized stuff over time. And I'm just trying to like watch a lot of that stuff, and a lot of it to me is like super inspiring. And I try to learn, and we'll see where it all goes. I don't know.
It's great you share that.
It's funny being on your own.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I asked you, Aleksey, because I've especially over the last year or so, I've definitely kind of struggled with figuring some of those things out. I think a lot of entrepreneurs do, in terms of they go out on their own, they're doing things on their own, and they get some good momentum, and then it's about, okay, how do I turn this into a real company? And I think there's not a lot of advisors or people that you can turn to, and I think so. That's part of the reason we want to have these conversations, is to share some of those stories. So
just really quickly, just on your point, like I also started having pretty deep questions that I never thought I would have, which is like do I want to create a company? Right? Like I mean I don't know. Like I'm blessed to have 3 girls, an amazing wife, and it's like, what are my goals? Like, is my goal to make like a few $100K a year and like kind of chill? But be super available for the family and have flexibility. Or am I trying to build a company that is worth, that's churning like a few $1,000,000 a year? I think both are possible, but they require very different paths. And that itself is like such a deep exploration. And you have to know yourself so well because it's like, and depending on the one you choose, it's like, well, what are the pros and cons of it? And How fulfilled are you going to be? What are your sort of like I would call them like unhealthy desires. You know what I'm saying? Like maybe you just want a big business out of ego, and you actually, but in reality, it would actually be really bad for you.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of like self work really to understand yourself and be true to what you want to build. It's just like building a business. It's just so much more than building a business. It's like really, it's really something.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge commitment. I think you're figuring out your priorities. You're right. I think that's really kind of what you're hitting on, and it's not something that can be taken lightly, because once you go down that route, of course, you can always change course, but you start a company, you're committing resources and time and bringing people into the fold, and it's a big commitment.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Aleksey, thanks so much for talking to us today. It was really a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was fun. Thank you, John and Rachel.
Well,
thank you.
What's the best way for the audience to kind of get in touch or follow along?
So I mean, my name is pretty unique. I think if you Google it, you'll find my Twitter and LinkedIn. I post there, or usually post there every day. The past week has been slow. I also write, as I said, to 4,000 LPs. That's lplessons.co. And people can sign up. I write free stuff on there, some paid stuff. And anyone can always reach out to me as well. It's Aleksey, my first name, at hey.com.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again. It was great having you, and look forward to seeing you soon. We want to hear your thoughts and feedback on today's episode, and what topics you would like us to discuss in future episodes.
Follow us on Spotify to be notified when our next episode is live. To connect with John and I, follow us on LinkedIn.
Thanks for joining us today on Breaking New Ground.